There is a protein source that fed families when meat disappeared. A food that can grow in exhausted soil, in heat that breaks most crops. With rainfall so unreliable, farmers stop planting anything else. It isn't a modern plant-based alternative. It isn't a lab invention. It isn't new. It's older than the global food system that ignores it. And it has a secret built into its design. It was never meant to be eaten with anything. Because unlike most staples, grain alone, root alone, even many beans alone, this one was built to be complete. A balanced food, protein, energy, fats, minerals, in one seed. Yet most of the world has never heard its name. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded in a way that modern markets can't easily turn into dependency. A crop that grows on the margins, feeds people on the margins, and survives without permission, doesn't fit neatly into a system that rewards control. Pause. This is the story of the Bambara groundnut, Vigna subterranea -- sometimes called Bambara bean, sometimes earth pea, sometimes simply the bean that hides. A plant protein that kept humans alive without meat, and the quiet reasons it never became a global staple. Welcome to Forgotten Earth Vault. Intro music swell, then soften. Before we open this vault, a quick note. This story is educational. History, agriculture, nutrition, and documented observation. It is not medical advice. Now, let's begin where the crop itself begins. Underground. 1. The bean that doesn't ask to be seen. Most food plants show you their harvest. Wheat waves in the wind. Corn stands like a wall. Fruit hangs like a signal. But Bambara is different. It flowers above ground, small, modest blooms. And then, quietly, the plant bends its work downward. Its pods develop in the soil. The food hides where heat can't scorch it, where animals can't easily steal it, where drought can't take everything at once. It is a survival strategy disguised as a farming trait. In many parts of Africa, especially semi-arid regions where seasons are unpredictable, this matters. Because when rains fail, the topsoil becomes a gamble, and every exposed harvest becomes a target. So Bambara does what resilience crops do best. It makes food where disasters have to dig to find it. And the people who kept it alive understood that instinctively. 2. A complete food that never needed meat. Here's the part most modern diet conversations miss. In many places, meat is not a daily food. It's occasional, it's expensive, it's seasonal, it's tied to wealth, animals, and stability. So the question for most human history wasn't, how do I optimize my diet? It was, how do I survive the year? That's where Bambara becomes extraordinary. Researchers describe Bambara groundnut as a nutrient-dense legume with a balanced macronutrient profile, sometimes referred to as a complete food. PMC +2, PubMed +2. In one widely cited nutritional profile, Bambara groundnut is reported around approximately 64% carbohydrate, approximately 23% protein, approximately 6% fat, plus fiber and minerals. PMC. That balance matters, because many staple grains provide energy but less protein. Many protein foods lack easy energy. Some crops are high yield but nutritionally narrow. Bambara doesn't try to be the best at one thing. It tries to be enough at everything. The U.S. National Academies, in its work on under-recognized African crops, calls Bambara bean a rare example of a complete food, noting the unusual way it can balance food needs in places facing chronic malnutrition. National Academies. And crucially, studies of Bambara also highlight its essential amino acid profile and overall protein value in ways that make it a meaningful protein source where animal foods are limited. PLOS +1. This isn't a trendy discovery. It's an old reality that modern food systems often overlook. 3. Who kept this crop alive? There's another detail hidden inside the Bambara story. it isn't just an underutilized crop. It's often described as a smallholder crop, commonly grown in low input conditions and in many regions closely associated with women's farming and processing work. PMC+1. That matters because when historians talk about major crops, they usually mean crops that served empires, trade, taxes, and export. But survival crops don't always show up in that record. They live in family plots, they live in local markets, they live in recipes that don't get written down. So the global food narrative becomes distorted. The world gets taught that only a handful of crops matter. The crops that became commodities, wheat, rice, corn, soy, and everything else becomes minor, even if it fed real people for generations. Bambara is one of those foods, not forgotten by everyone, just ignored by the places that decide what counts. 4. Why industrial agriculture didn't choose it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Modern food systems don't select crops for resilience first. They select crops for scalability. A crop wins when it can be. Harvested uniformly, processed cheaply, shipped long distances, stored in warehouses, standardized into global products. Bambara, like many survival foods, resists that kind of neatness. It's grown across varied environments. It has diverse local varieties. It's often processed locally. It is food that behaves like culture, not like a factory part. And there's another factor. Bambara groundnut is widely described as neglected and underutilized compared to major global cash crops. PubMed+1. Neglected doesn't mean unimportant. It means the research, breeding investment, and industrial infrastructure went elsewhere. Because commodity systems reward a narrow set of crops that fit a narrow set of machines, markets, and policies. So Bambara ends up in a strange position. It's nutritionally strong, it's climate tolerant, it's culturally rooted, but it isn't engineered into the global supply chain. 5. The climate crop, hiding in plain sight. In the last decade, the world has started saying the word resilience like it's new. But Bambara has been living resilience for a long time. Scientific reviews repeatedly describe Bambara groundnut as comparatively drought-tolerant and valuable for climate-ready agriculture, especially in low-input systems. PubMed+2, SpringerLink+2. That doesn't mean it never suffers in drought. No crop is invincible. But it does mean Bambara belongs to a category the modern world desperately needs: crops designed for uncertainty. And unlike many high-input commodity crops, Bambara can produce in conditions where fertilizer use is limited and soils are poor, conditions that are reality for millions of farmers, not theory. Colostate.pressbooks.pub+1. So why isn't this everywhere? Because resilience is not always profitable in the short term. A crop that thrives without constant inputs doesn't create the same continuous sales loop. And the global system, quietly, predictably, invests where the loop is strongest. 6. The protein score nobody advertises. When plant proteins are discussed globally, the conversation usually turns into a duel: soy versus everything. Soy wins the market because soy is not just food. It's oil, livestock feed, industrial ingredient, global trade. Bambara doesn't play that game. It plays the human game: can you eat it and keep going? In a study on Bambara's utilization and composition, researchers describe it as a cheap, protein-rich source and discuss how it can contribute to food and nutrition security. PLOS. And it's not only about quantity. Bambara has been reported to have strong essential amino acid content and protein scoring compared with some other legumes, reinforcing why it has long been viewed as nutritionally valuable. PLOS+1. Again, this is not hype, it's documentation. But documentation doesn't automatically become visibility. Visibility requires marketing, distribution, and story, and Bambara's story stayed local, while other crops became global brands. 7. The quiet erasure, not a ban, a disappearing. Some forgotten foods have a dramatic villain, a prohibition, a war, a law. Bambara's erasure is quieter. It's the kind that happens when research funding goes elsewhere, seed systems prioritize other crops, school curricula teach only commodity staples, global markets reward uniformity. In other words, Bambara wasn't defeated, it was outcompeted by infrastructure. You can call something underutilized, but what that often means is it wasn't given the tools to compete in a world designed for a different kind of agriculture. And yet it survives anyway. Because survival foods don't need applause, they need soil and memory. 8. What a forgotten protein really means. When people hear forgotten protein, they imagine a niche ingredient. But historically, protein isn't just fitness. Protein is function building tissues, maintaining body systems, surviving long seasons of scarcity. In many rural food cultures, beans are not a side dish. They are the foundation. Bambara represents a kind of nutrition that modern food systems often break apart. Energy here, protein there, fat somewhere else, then rebuild it into products. But Bambara never needed that reconstruction. It arrives already assembled. Carbohydrate for energy, protein for structure, fats and minerals for depth, PMC +2, PubMed +2. That's why some sources describe it as complete, not because it's magical, because it's balanced in a way that's rare. 9. The future that looks like the past. Now, widen the lens. Bambara groundnut is not the only forgotten crop with this story. It belongs to a family of foods, often called orphan crops or underutilized crops. That kept humans alive through variable climates long before modern stability. And now stability is cracking. Heat, rainfall shifts, soil degradation, rising costs of inputs. In scientific reviews, Bambara is repeatedly framed as a legume with potential importance in future food security, precisely because it can be cultivated under harsh conditions where other crops struggle. PubMed +2, PMC +2. This isn't about nostalgia. It's about remembering that human survival was never built on only 4 crops. We made it through history because we had diversity. Because we had local foods that matched local stress. Because some crops were designed not for profit, but for endurance. Bambara is endurance. 10. The vault's lesson. So here's what this vault reveals. A plant protein can be extraordinary and still be invisible. Because the modern world doesn't only choose foods by nutrition, it chooses foods by logistics, by power, by scale, by the ease of turning a plant into a product pipeline. Bambara groundnut, this underground bean, didn't disappear because it lacked value. It disappeared from mainstream attention because it refused to become a global commodity on command. And yet it remains in soil, in seed, in the hands of farmers who plant for survival, not for trends. A hidden protein that doesn't need meat to matter, a complete food that never asked permission to be one. Soft music rise. If you've never heard of Bambara groundnut before, that's not your failure. That's a map of what gets amplified and what gets ignored. And if this vault changed how you see protein, then the mission is working. Because forgotten foods aren't just ingredients, they're options, they're resilience stored in biology. They're evidence that the future might depend on remembering what we buried. This is Forgotten Earth Vault. If you want more documentary stories like this, forgotten foods, erased systems, and survival wisdom hidden in plain sight, subscribe. The next vault opens soon. End music. Fade out.